Then Jesus told his disciples, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me." In line with this verse, many Christians say we're supposed to die to self or crucify the flesh. Christianity calls its followers to become living sacrifices, and self-sacrifice is put forward as one of the highest virtues. What comes to mind when you hear these ideas? Is self-sacrifice a virtue? What constitutes a virtuous sacrifice? What about the idea of giving it to God, it being your worries, desires, etc., no longer clinging to such things, but dying to self by sacrificing your wishes to a higher power? In this video, I want to show why these ideas can be beneficial, but also how they can be misunderstood. I believe the concept of the self from Jungian psychology can be helpful in making these points. The self with the capital S refers to the whole of who you are, as opposed to the lowercase self, or ego, which only accounts for those parts of yourself you are conscious of. Along with this concept, I want to include the 3 poisons of Buddhism. According to Buddhism, the root of our suffering is ignorance, which is one of the 3 poisons. Our ignorance of how things really work leads us to the other poisons, which are greed or attachment and hatred or aversion. In the self's limited view, in his ignorance, he decides that he needs to cling to this or that experience and avoid other experiences in order to be okay. These are the reasons we suffer, as everything is impermanent, constantly passing away, and cannot be clung to. And whatever is here, whatever is real, cannot be avoided. When we deny the self, it's these attachments and aversions that we are giving up. We recognize that the ego is ignorant, it doesn't have the full picture, and it's often mistaken. We give up these things out of faith in the higher self that knows better than the ego, that's more real than the ego. Dying to self is very much an act of faith, but a worthwhile one. The thing is, when the ego leads the charge, we are not in touch with reality. The ego always tries and ultimately fails to reshape reality to its liking, and this will always cause suffering, as reality cannot be changed. This leads me to another point, which is that nothing is actually lost in this kind of sacrifice. The ego may perceive a loss, but the only thing being removed is the illusion produced by our ignorance. In Jungian terms, to die to self is to live to self, to be more of who you are rather than less. In St. Paul's words, to live is Christ, to die is gain. The ego is tricky, and will use anything to take control, even the most virtuous and high-minded concepts. It's for this reason I believe many people are mistaken when claiming their acts are self-sacrificial. For many people, the things they are sacrificing are parts of the self that the ego doesn't want there. This is the opposite of self-sacrifice in the Christian sense. When engaging in behavior you believe is self-sacrificial, it may be useful to ask, am I dying to self or dying to self? When giving it to God, you could ask, am I bringing this into the light or am I shoving it in the dark? To die to self is to die to your ideas of how things ought to be, and to work with reality as it is. This means allowing every part to have its place, bringing every part into the light, rather than hiding it or tucking it away. While this video, like all videos on my channel, are not meant for Christians alone, these are still spiritual matters. Knowing whether or not you're making proper sacrifices requires discernment and a sense of spiritual realities. Some of these realities include faith and wisdom, things I've covered on this channel, but also things like the peace beyond understanding and other divine attributes I'll be covering later on. If you have a sense of these things, or simply have virtues you wish to attain, another important question to ask is, does the sacrifice bring a stronger sense of my virtues? Proper self-sacrifice may not always be easy, but it will be satisfying on a deep level, as it brings you closer to reality. I always love pointing out how Jesus says his yoke is easy and his burden is light, but he also calls us to carry our cross up the hill and be crucified with him. How can both of these be true? If you want to find out, deny yourself.